The roar of the wind was deafening, a relentless howl that cut through the insulated layers of Commander Elias Morgan's gear. Even after decades of navigating the most hostile environments on Earth, Antarctica's unyielding vastness still unsettled him. It wasn't just the cold, it was the emptiness, the feeling of standing at the edge of the world where nature ruled with an icy fist. Morgan adjusted his climbing harness and surveyed the team assembled around him. 5 of them in total, each handpicked for this mission. He had worked with most of them before, but familiarity brought little comfort given their destination. He glanced at the gaping crevasse before them, its jagged edges glittering like shards of broken glass in the weak polar sunlight. "This is where their signal cut out," he said, his voice muffled through his thermal mask. His words were directed at Lila Carter, the team's geologist, and one of the brightest minds in subterranean mapping. She was already busy calibrating her equipment, the faint glow of her scanner flickering in the dim light. "If the coordinates are accurate, the tunnel system starts about 30 meters down," she replied without looking up. "But there's something strange about the readings. The formations shouldn't be this symmetrical." Morgan didn't press her for details. He'd learned to trust her instincts, even when they hinted at the impossible. The others stood in silence, double-checking their gear and avoiding the unspoken question hanging in the air. What really happened to the scientists? The descent began with the precision of a well-rehearsed drill. Ropes were anchored, harnesses secured, and one by one they lowered themselves into the icy maw. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the air became, as though the weight of the frozen continent pressed down on them. Morgan's radio crackled intermittently, the static occasionally punctuated by bursts of distorted sound that resembled voices, though he chalked it up to the wind. By the time they reached the first ledge, the light from the surface was a distant memory. Only their headlamps illuminated the cavern, casting long, flickering shadows across walls of glacial blue. The ice seemed to glow faintly in some places, as if alive, veins of some unearthly mineral threading through its crystalline structure. Carter stopped suddenly, her gloved hand brushing against one of the walls. "Commander," she called, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "You need to see this." Morgan approached, kneeling beside her. At first glance, it was just ice, smooth, flawless, and ancient. But as his light swept over it, patterns emerged. Perfectly straight lines intersected in intricate, almost mathematical designs. The geometry was unlike anything he'd ever seen, the shapes too precise to be natural. "Could it be fissures?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Carter shook her head. "Number these. These are carvings. Someone made this." Morgan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the sub-zero temperatures. "How deep are we?" "Not deep enough," Carter replied. "This shouldn't be here." The team pressed on, their unease mounting with every step. The tunnel widened, and the carvings became more frequent, the designs growing more elaborate. Dr. Thomas Greaves, the team's biologist, paused to examine a cluster of strange, jagged protrusions embedded in the ice. He chipped away a fragment and held it under his light. "Bones," he muttered, "but not like any I've seen. Too long, too segmented." Morgan didn't reply. His attention was fixed ahead, where the tunnel opened into a massive cavern. The air seemed warmer here, heavy with moisture and a faint, metallic tang. The team's lights revealed the source of the heat, a structure unlike anything on Earth. It rose from the cavern floor like an obelisk, its surface smooth and black, absorbing rather than reflecting light. Glyphs covered every inch, their shapes jagged and fluid at the same time, as though they'd been etched by something not entirely solid. The monolith pulsed faintly, a rhythm that resonated in Morgan's chest like the distant beat of a massive heart. "What the hell is that?" murmured Daniels, their communications specialist, breaking the silence. No one answered. Carter approached cautiously, her scanner held out before her. The device beeped erratically, unable to form a coherent reading. "It's emitting something," she said. "Not radiation, not heat, something else." Morgan stepped closer, his instincts screaming at him to stay away. The monolith was unnerving, but what disturbed him more was the realization that the carvings on the ice weren't random. They led here, forming a path straight to the structure. "This isn't a natural discovery," he said, his voice low. "It's a warning." The words had barely left his mouth when the ground beneath them rumbled. A low, guttural sound echoed through the cavern, reverberating through the ice. The team froze, their lights darting around in search of the source. "Seismic activity?" Carter asked, though she didn't sound convinced. Morgan's gut told him otherwise. This wasn't tectonic movement. It felt alive. "Everyone stay sharp," he ordered, gripping his ice axe. "We're not alone down here." They stood in tense silence, the cavern stretching out around them like the hollow chest of a giant, every shadow a potential threat. The hum from the monolith grew louder, vibrating in their bones. Morgan took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Whatever they had come to find, it wasn't something meant to be disturbed. The air was heavier now, carrying a metallic tang that lingered in the back of their throats. Commander Elias Morgan led the way, his headlamp sweeping across the undulating ice walls. The team's footsteps crunched rhythmically, a fragile sound against the oppressive silence. Every movement echoed oddly, the acoustics warped by the alien geometry of the cavern. The monolith's lingering hum followed them like a shadow, growing fainter with distance but never entirely disappearing. Each member of the team had heard it differently. Carter described it as a low-frequency vibration, while Greaves swore it was more like a whisper, fragmented and just on the edge of comprehension. Morgan said nothing about what he heard, because he wasn't sure it was entirely sound. Ahead, the tunnel twisted sharply, the angles unnervingly clean. It looked more like an engineered corridor than a natural formation. Carter stopped, crouching to inspect a series of glyphs etched into the ice. They seemed to pulsate faintly under her light, though when she touched them, they felt cold and solid. "These markings," she said softly, her breath fogging. "They're getting more detailed. Whoever or whatever made them was communicating something." Morgan knelt beside her, studying the intricate lines. The symbols radiated an unsettling energy, an alien logic that seemed to crawl into his thoughts the longer he looked. "Can you decipher them?" he asked, though he doubted they had time for that. "Not yet," she replied, her voice tinged with frustration. "But they're layered, as if they're meant to be read on multiple levels, like they're alive." Daniel's voice cut through their radios. "Let's not hang around to read the walls, yeah? Something about this place feels—" His words cut off abruptly, replaced by a burst of static. Morgan straightened. "Daniels, do you copy?" Silence. "Daniels!" Morgan barked, his voice reverberating down the tunnel. The team exchanged uneasy glances. Carter adjusted her headset. His signal just dropped, like he's not there anymore. Split up, Greaves suggested hesitantly. No, Morgan snapped. We stick together. He can't have gone far. The search was brief and fruitless. Daniel's pack and equipment lay undisturbed on the icy ground, but there was no sign of him. No tracks leading away, no sign of struggle. It was as if the ice had swallowed him whole. The team pressed on, though their unease had sharpened into palpable fear. The tunnel expanded into another chamber, smaller than the first, but equally alien. More glyphs adorned the walls, their designs becoming increasingly erratic, as if the creators had descended into madness. In the center of the chamber lay an array of objects, scattered as if abandoned in haste. Carter knelt to inspect them. These aren't tools, she muttered. They're artifacts. Or maybe biological remains? Morgan approached, his boots crunching on the icy floor. The objects were obsidian black, their surfaces smooth but irregular. Some appeared vaguely organic, resembling bones or chitinous shells. Others defied categorization entirely, their shapes shifting subtly when viewed from different angles. Greaves crouched beside one object, pulling out a specimen container. "This isn't fossilized," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "It's fresh, or preserved in a way we don't understand." "Bag it," Morgan ordered. "We'll analyze it topside." Before Greaves could comply, a sound rippled through the chamber, a low, guttural clicking that sent a shiver down Morgan's spine. It came from nowhere and everywhere, reverberating off the ice. "Movement!" Carter shouted, her headlamp darting toward the far corner of the chamber. They all froze, their lights converging on the spot. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, just at the edge of visibility, a shadow shifted. It wasn't a trick of the light, it was deliberate, slow, and disturbingly fluid. "What the hell is that?" Greaves whispered, his voice barely audible. Morgan gripped his ice axe tighter. "Stay together." Back toward the tunnel. They moved cautiously, their lights scanning the room. The shadow disappeared, replaced by a faint, wet sound, like something dragging itself across the ice. Morgan's instincts screamed at him to run, but he held his ground, determined not to let the team dissolve into chaos. Then came the whispers. They started faint, barely discernible over the sounds of their breathing. A fragmented murmur that seemed to rise from the ice itself. Words in a language none of them recognized, though the cadence was disturbingly familiar. It felt invasive, as if the sound bypassed their ears and went straight into their minds. Carter clutched her head, grimacing. "Do you hear that? It's inside me." "Focus," Morgan said, though his own temples throbbed in sync with the whispers. The clicking sound grew louder, interspersed with wet, shuffling noises. Something massive and unseen was circling them, staying just out of sight. The whispers intensified, and Morgan saw Carter's light falter as she staggered against the wall. "They're watching us," she muttered, her voice trembling. "They've been watching us this whole time." Before Morgan could respond, the ice beneath their feet shuddered violently. A crack splintered across the chamber floor, splitting it into jagged sections. From the largest fissure, something emerged. It wasn't a creature, not exactly. Not yet. A mass of tendrils, slick and glistening, writhed upward, forming and reforming into shapes that defied comprehension. Its surface was a patchwork of textures, scales, flesh, chitin, and something metallic. It moved with impossible grace, flowing as if the ice itself had birthed it. Morgan acted on instinct. Move! Back to the tunnel, now! The team scrambled toward the exit, their lights dancing wildly. The whispers morphed into a cacophony, the alien words now joined by faint screams, human screams. Daniel's voice was among them. Morgan was the last to leave the chamber, glancing back just in time to see the thing fully emerge. It turned toward him, or perhaps it simply sensed him. Its form shifted, and for the briefest moment he saw something horrifying. A human face, half-formed and screaming, embedded in its surface. The tunnel walls seemed to close in around them as they fled. The clicking sounds followed, growing fainter but never entirely fading. When they finally stopped to catch their breath, Morgan looked back at the team. Carter was pale, trembling. Greaves stared blankly at his specimen container, clutching it like a talisman. Morgan exhaled, forcing calm into his voice. "We don't stop moving until we're out of here, no matter what we hear, no matter what we see." But deep down, he knew it wasn't just a matter of escaping. Whatever had been buried here wasn't content to remain forgotten. Continuation of the story, coming soon.